Absolutely, and I think again, I mean that they're it's the top brass that are involved in this, and again, there's a few excellent articles on a website. I can have these links up, by the way, on the Red Eyes info page for those who want to dig deeper into this. But it's called Beyond the Dutroux Affair, and that goes into a whole lot, that goes into the Belgian rings, pedophile networks, the rings that were, tied into the snuff, and all the people that were involved in this. And it's a horrible story. It's incredible, and it's so you get kind of disconnected from it because it's so unbelievable on one level. You kind of like, this cannot be happening. This must be someone. This someone who's deluding him or herself here when they write about this or whatever. But again, we have the testimony, and many people are talking about it, and more investigating it, and it's the case. Very unfortunate, but it's the case. One thing I did want to address here is the very interesting, because previously we talked about that the white man looks at the, or those, we should say, not all white. We shouldn't draw everybody, over the same border here, whatever you want to call it. We can be specific and say that those people who have been involved in the things that you've been talking about here, Kevin, those potentially are not viewing the Indians as part of the human race or what have you. But that there's a reverse to that as well. I think there's even an Indian term for it. You said it in the film that the white man is a man who has no soul to the Indian Native Americans, right?
Yeah, that's the term they had. The Mamakni.
There you go. Yeah.
On the West Coast, it means a ghost person or person without substance.
There you go.
And it's kind of like the West Coast Indians had that name for whites when they first saw them, because not only because they looked so pale, but I remember one of them said that his great grandfather had said to somebody, "These people all look like slaves. They're all working for a master," and we don't have that experience among the indigenous cultures here. Among their people, they had slaves, but the person wasn't dehumanized in the way that Europeans were dehumanizing each other.
Right.
And crushing one another, and exploiting each other. And they didn't understand that. They said, well, these people must not have souls if they're going to do that to each other, right? And I think, I look around and I think, well, yeah, it's even more so nowadays,
Yeah. Well, it's very, it's more a philosophical question, of course, but there's the potential that there actually is a very huge difference. I mean, we could even be talking about, in a way, two different species here because of the mentality. It's so different, and it's so they're so foreign to each other, if you will.
It's true. I see that all the time. Although I think that was the result of kind of evolving. Like, I don't believe that we all come from an indigenous culture originally.
Of course, yes.
And we do have those traditions. To give an example, there's a lot of resonation that goes on between things I've learned about my culture in Ireland and indigenous people. A lot of the same beliefs, a matrilineal system, a belief in eternity and in the immortality of the soul. All of those ideas, they're really common. And somehow that got lost and destroyed. And I say in the film that, Europeans who came over to North America, we were all trauma victims because we were escaping, being forced off our land, religious wars, persecution, all of that we brought over here, and we hadn't dealt with it. And centuries of that kind of destruction in Europe kind of drove a lot of important things out of us. And I think part of the challenge now is to be able to recover those, the connectedness to the earth, to each other, our humanity. And in a way, looking at these crimes in residential schools is a way to do that, because we can say, well, look at what we did. When are we going to take responsibility, not with a bit of money and compensation to people we wronged, but when are we going to look at ourselves and start healing ourselves, because we're destroying our planet,
Yeah.
And this is the real challenge of this, is that allow us to begin to do that.
Do you think, when you're involved in this kind of work and see this so up close, so to speak, is there any hope for the Western, civilization, or if you even want to term it or call it that, rather?
I think our culture is going down. We can't sustain it. I think there's a lot of signs that, we have limited time left, but that doesn't mean it's over. It means something else will rise up to replace it.
Right.
And we're at the end, kind of a turning point, as on a cycle, one line is going down and another is coming up, and we're at the meeting point where the two converge. And we have to decide what kind of world we're going to live in. Are we going to live in the old,
And I mean, can you do that at the same time as you're kind of digging up the bad root, so to speak, of this ugly tree that we've been mainly addressing here today?
That's a really good question, and personally, I wonder that all the time. I mean, I don't think you can. You can't do both. You've got to, to be honest, in a way, I felt like when I lost my family in that, I had the feeling of, well, my life is over. It's been sacrificed for this purpose, but at least I can bring up the truth about this. At least I can unearth this so we can look at it. And maybe that's meant I have to give up other things in my life, but you can't. I don't know if you can do both. I mean, it's not the same job. And just in a week, I learned so many terrible things. I don't know, digging around like that, it certainly has affected me. It certainly, it's a thing I struggle with all the time.
Right. I guess the trick also is to also recognize that this is not the mentality of everyone out there, so to speak. It's so easy to get tainted by all the negative stuff that is going on in the world and to lose hope, if you will, in entire humanity because of this. I think that would be a huge mistake, actually.
Yeah, you're right, and I do have, the way I look at things has definitely been affected by all of this. But that's that's where trust comes in. I know there's others who are going to carry this further when I'm long gone, and I hope that a lot of what I brought out is going to be a way to allow people to see the truth and to push humanity forward somehow. That's all you can hope for.
Yes, indeed. No, I mean, again, I'm very rather positive about the future in that regard. I think that it has to be kind of become a bit worse, so to speak, before it gets better, because we can't just move on and expect that things are going to be a great new world, but not looking into the past and digging up, as I mentioned, some of the ugly roots to this, because I think it's important to recognize what has been going on. And it's also actually, in one regard, it's an interesting study in regards to the history of the human race, if nothing else, on how people have been studying the Roman Empire for centuries now, and it's a fascinating study, and to see how things can be perverted like that, and ultimately this is just an extension of the same empire still kind of running to this day, and it's we have to be the change we want to see of the world if this is going to be change, because this is probably not going to just die off of itself and go away, but we need to consciously, actively try to force this out of the way and begin to live proper lives, so to speak.
Well, that's the dream, that's the hope, and we can't ever lose sight of that. You know what? To use an analogy, just from being a minister, it's like working with a family one of whose members are dying. And in death and dying counseling, it's often the person who isn't part of the family system who needs to be telling the truth to them in a very gentle way and loving way. But there's all these mechanisms within a family of denial, especially in European culture. I find in North American culture, you find so much fear about death.
Yep.
You've lost the kind of normal. Traditionally, death was accepted and seen as part of the cycle. And I remember reading about how in the Middle Ages, when somebody was dying in Europe, the house would be opened up and people were welcome to come in. And the Irish wake is part of that tradition, where you sit around and you party for 3 days to help the soul pass on, to comfort the family. And yet now there's such fear around death. A professional funeral home handles it. That when the person is dying, I find counseling people, it's been very interesting going back and forth between the white and native world, because when I'm counseling white families who have somebody dying, there's often you'll hear the comment, "Oh, they'll be up and around again in a week."
There you go.
They'll go in and pat them on the shoulder and say, "You're looking fine. You'll be up." They can't face the fact that this person is going to go, and they have to say their goodbyes, and they have to look at it. I think, and whereas in the native world, people come in and they grieve and they cry together and they look at it straight in the face. And that's what we would normally do as a human being. But in a culture filled with fear, which North America is the most frightened culture in the world, because it's the most powerful, it feels they have so much to lose. We can't look at death and loss. And what I'm trying to do here now with this work is kind of on a broader scale what I would do with any family in my culture, which is say, look at who we are, look at what the destruction we've caused. That way of life is dying. We have to accept that death and embrace it. Something new can And I guess in a way that's what I'm doing. If you kind of step back and look at, in a broader sense, what I'm doing, I think that's part of what it is.
Yes, yes, it's about understanding the past, and how is it in regards to the tradition of some of the native peoples up there? I mean, are they like all gone, or are there still some Native Americans left up if we talk about the region you're in Canada?
Yeah, you mean their original culture and.
Yeah, that too, of course, exactly, because if they've been, if you will, what do you call it, too much immersed in the Western culture, a lot of their traditions will be lost, and it might not be, the same, if you will,
A lot's been lost. To give an example, there's about 50 native languages still in use in Canada, and another generation, there are probably going to be 3 or 4 left, they figure.
Oops,
dying off at that rate. You see a lot of us, well, the polite Canadian word for this is assimilation, but it's destruction.
Right.
A lot of Native people want to become, quote, like whites, because that's to them a safe way to be. You're not going to be, persecuted if you try to emulate the ones who've been abusing you, right? And so you see a lot of Native people just not caring about their culture and that. But nevertheless, younger people today, they seem to be free of a lot of that trauma more and more. So they're the ones who are reclaiming this. You see, when we hold protests and vigils and that, it's always younger Native people and the hereditary elders who come out. They're not as traumatized. They're able to face this stuff. And, in each new generation, there's always that hope.
Absolutely. That's very encouraging, at least. Again, not being kind of tainted, because I guess in one regard, it's or at least on a few different levels, it's a bit more freer today than it was 50 or 100 years ago in that regard, and people can to some extent live their own lives out within the system, but yet kind of outside it, if you will.
Right, and I think that there's more. I'm 52 now, and I remember when I was active in my 20s, people took a lot longer to become aware of issues. Now there seems to be a quicker consciousness of things than there used to be. People are more aware more quickly of what's happening in the world. Maybe that's due to technology. I don't know.
Could be, yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
But I see that happening at a quicker rate now, and that's encouraging.
Very much so. I want to talk a little bit about some of the recent things that has been going on. There was an apology that was uttered, I guess, from the governments. Is that right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, last June 11th, the Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, he got up in Parliament and he apologized for the residential schools. But it wasn't really an apology. He talked very generally. He didn't talk about children dying. He didn't say that people were going to be brought to trial for those deaths. He didn't talk about, really looking into the crimes. He spoke very generally, and that was it. There was no follow-up. There was no, discussion of, well, apology is fine, but what is it going to do to actually help people? None of that happened. So it's interesting when you look at the word apology. It has a double meaning and a contradictory meaning in English. An apology can be an expression of regret, but it can also be a defense for your own actions. An apologetic is something you write in defense of somebody.
That's right. Yes, of course. Huh.
And his apology definitely had that tone of, well, yes, bad things happened. We're sorry it happened, but we're not going to be held responsible for it. We did what we had to do. That was kind of between the lines. And the proof of that is the fact that they some of the other party leaders that got up made reference to mass graves of children.